through the centuries, especially Middle Ages on, the common folk desired some way to celebrate in a way that was visual and memorable. And so the Tenebrae Service developed as several things. One, a progressive darkening of the day as death and darkness surrounded the earth and came upon Jesus. There's also then the Christ candle, which is in the center. And we have borrowed the Advent candle, his birth, for this purpose, to demonstrate that he was born for this purpose. And as candles are extinguished and lights go out, readings are read to help lead you, and there'll be times of meditation, and we'll encourage you to take a hold of the quietness. Let the quietness invade your life and surround you as you focus on and meditate on the life and suffering and death of Jesus. And then at the end, as the Christ candle is removed, there's a loud sound symbolizing two things, but originally it was the earthquake that happened when Jesus died. But secondly, it also symbolizes, therefore, the opening of our tomb, his coming out, and the promise of his coming out, his return on Easter Sunday will be signified by the returning of the Christ candle towards the very end. So I invite you to join us this evening for Tenebrae. The light has come into the world, and the world loved darkness rather than light.
God sent his Son into the world, not to condemn the world, but that the world might be saved through him.
Lift up your hearts.
We lift them up to the Lord. The service of the Word. I looked when he broke the sixth seal, and there was a great earthquake, and the sun became black as sackcloth made of hair, and the whole moon became like blood, and the stars of the sky fell to the earth, as a fig tree casts its unripe figs when shaken by a great wind. The sky was split apart like a scroll when it is rolled up, and every mountain and island were moved out of their places. Then the kings of the earth, and the great men, and the commanders, and the rich, and the strong, and every slave, and every free man, hid themselves in the caves and among the rocks of the mountains. And they said to the mountains and to the rocks, fall on us and hide us from the presence of him who sits on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of their wrath has come, and who is able to stand? Revelations 6, 12 through 17. service of shadows, the shadow of betrayal. Now the feast of unleavened bread, which is called the Passover, was approaching. The chief priests and the scribes were seeing how they might put him to death, for they were afraid of the people. And Satan entered into Judas, who was called Iscariot, belonging to the number of the 12. And he went away and discussed with the chief priests and officers how he might betray him to them. They were glad and agreed to give him money. So he consented and began seeking a good opportunity to betray him to them apart from the crowd. Luke 22, verses 1 through 6. The shadow of the agony of the Spirit. Then Jesus came with them to a place called Gethsemane and said to his disciples, "Sit here while I go over there and pray." And he took with him Peter and the 2 sons of Zebedee and began to be grieved and distressed. Then he said to them, "My soul is deeply grieved to the point of death. Remain here, keep watch with me." And he went a little beyond them and fell on his face and prayed, saying, "My Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. Yet not as I will, but as you will." And he came to the disciples and found them sleeping and said to Peter, "So you men could not keep watch with me for 1 hour? Keep watching and praying that you may not enter into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak." He went away again a second time and prayed, saying, "My Father, if this cannot pass away unless I drink it, your will be done." Again he came and found them sleeping, for their eyes were heavy. And he left them again and went away and prayed a third time, saying the same thing once more. Matthew 26, verses 36 through 44. The shadow of arrest. Immediately, while he was still speaking, Judas, one of the 12, came up accompanied by a crowd with swords and clubs. who were from the chief priests and the scribes and the elders. Now he who was betraying him had given them a signal, saying, "Whomever I kiss, he is the one. Seize him and lead him away under guard." After coming, Judas immediately went to him, saying, "Rabbi," and kissed him. They laid hands on him and seized him. But one of those who stood by drew his sword and struck the slave of the high priest and cut off his ear. And Jesus said to them, "Have you come out with swords and clubs to arrest me, as you would against a robber? Every day I was with you in the temple teaching, and you did not seize me. But this has taken place to fulfill the scriptures." Mark chapter 14, 43 to 49. The shadow of desertion. And they all left him and fled. As Peter was below in the courtyard, one of the servant girls of the high priest came, and seeing Peter warming himself, she looked at him and said, "You also were with Jesus the Nazarene." But he denied it, saying, "I neither know nor understand what you are talking about." And he went out onto the porch, and a rooster crowed. The servant girl saw him and began once more to say to the bystanders, "This is one of them." But again he denied it. And after a little while, the bystanders were again saying to Peter, "Surely you are one of them, for you are Galilean too." But he began to curse and swear, "I do not know this man you're talking about." Immediately a rooster crowed a second time, and Peter remembered how Jesus had made the remark to him, "Before a rooster crows twice, you will deny me 3 times." And he began to weep. Mark 14, 50, 66 through 72. The shadow of accusation. Now Jesus stood before the governor, and the governor questioned him, saying, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And Jesus said to him, "It is as you say." And while he was being accused by the chief priests and elders, he did not answer. Then Pilate said to him, "Do you not hear how many things that testify against you?" And he did not answer him with regard to even a single charge. So the governor was quite amazed. Now at the feast, the governor was accustomed to release for the people any one prisoner whom they wanted. At that time, they were holding a notorious prisoner called Barabbas. So when the people gathered together, Pilate said to them, "Whom do you want me to release, Barabbas or Jesus, who is called Christ. But the governor said to them, which of the two do you want me to release for you? And they said, Barabbas. Pilate said to them, then what shall I do with Jesus, who is called Christ? They all said, crucify him! And he said, why? What evil has he done? But they kept shouting all the more, saying, crucify him! When Pilate saw that he was accomplished nothing, but rather that a riot was started, he took water and washed his hands in front of the crowd, saying, I am innocent of this man's blood. See to that yourselves. And all the people said, his blood shall be on us and on our children. Then he released Barabbas for them, but after having Jesus scourged, he handed him over to be crucified. Matthew 27, 11 through 18, 21 through 26. The shadow of crucifixion and humiliation. Then the soldiers of the governor took Jesus into the praetorium and gathered the whole Roman cohort around him. They stripped him and put a scarlet robe onto him. And after twisting together a crown of thorns, they put it on his head and a reed in his right hand. And they knelt down before him and mocked him, saying, Hail, King of the Jews! They spat on him and took the reed and began to beat him on the head. After they had mocked him, they took the scarlet robe off of him and put his own garments back on him and led him away to crucify him. As they were coming out, they found a man, a Cyrene named Simon, whom they pressed into service to bear his cross. And when they came to a place called Golgotha, which means place of a skull, they gave him wine to drink mixed with gall. And after tasting it, he was unwilling to drink. And when they had crucified him, they divided up his garments among themselves by casting lots. And sitting down, they began to keep watch over him. And above his head they put up the charge against him which read, This is Jesus, the King of the Jews. Matthew 27, 27 through 37. The shadow of death. And some of those who were standing there, when they heard it, began saying, This man is calling for Elijah. Immediately one of them ran, and taking a sponge, he filled it with sour wine and put it on a reed and gave him a drink. But the rest of them said, Let us see whether Elijah will come to save him. And Jesus cried out again with a loud voice and yielded up his spirit. And behold, the veil of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom, and the earth shook, and the rocks were split. The tombs were opened, and many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised. And coming out of the tombs after his resurrection, they entered the holy city and appeared to many. Now the centurion and those who were with him keeping guard over Jesus, when they saw the earthquake and the things that were happening, became very frightened and said, "Truly, this was the Son of God." Matthew 27:45-54. The shadow of burial. After these things, Joseph of Arimathea, being a disciple of Jesus, but a secret one for fear of the Jews, asked Pilate that he might take away the body of Jesus. And Pilate granted permission. So he came and took away his body. Nicodemus, who had first come to him by night, also came, bringing a mixture of myrrh and aloes, about 100 pounds weight. So they took the body of Jesus and bound it in linen wrappings with the spices, as is the burial custom of the Jews. Now in the place where he was crucified there was a garden, and in the garden a new tomb, in which no one had yet been laid. Therefore, because of the Jewish day of preparation, since the tomb was nearby, they laid Jesus there. John 19:38-42.
Were you there when they crucified my Lord? Were you there when they crucified my Lord? Oh, sometimes it causes me to tremble, tremble, tremble. Were you there when they crucified my Lord? Were you there when the sun refused to shine? Were you there when the sun refused to shine? Oh, sometimes it causes me to tremble, tremble, tremble. Were you there when the sun refused to shine? Were you there when they laid him in the tomb? Were you there when they laid him in the tomb? Oh, sometimes it causes me to tremble, tremble, tremble. you there when he rose up from the dead? Oh, sometimes it causes me to tremble, tremble, tremble. Were you there when he rose up from the dead? Demons, my soul, my life, my
As you may have noticed when we began, there's a shadowy figure of two angels by the tomb. The armies of God, always present, yet mostly not visible, waiting until Easter sunrise to declare to the women, the one you're looking for, he's alive. He's alive. Go tell his brothers. And so we wait this evening in hope of the resurrection, not only the story that we've told, but the end of our own story. And so I invite you to trust the hope we have that the grave is empty, that the victory has won, that he shall come again to get all of us, whether dead or alive, and to take us to be with himself forever. So to that end, would you receive the Lord's benediction? The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine on you and be gracious to you. The Lord reveal his face to you and give you his peace. Amen.